If you've seen my videos, you already understand that clerics are some powerhouse spellcasters. So let's talk about the best spells they have available. Hey fellow Game Masters, I'm Richard Quiner, and welcome back to the RPG Daily, your daily dose of all things tabletop role-playing games, helping you build your world and master your game. Today we're talking about cleric spells. Yes, we took a one-day break from talking about clerics after we finished the domains. We took a one-day break and now we're back. To do this list, it was kind of tough, to be honest, because clerics come in all shapes and sizes and all use abilities and skills and specializations. So it would be really difficult for me to look at it and decide what are the best spells for all clerics to have. So I made a couple rules for me to follow that would help me make some more generalizations about these spells and make a more general spell guide for clerics, I guess you'd call it. This video is long, it's a doozy, so buckle up. So self-imposed rule number 1 is that none of the spells on this list can be part of the Divine Domain spells that are given to clerics for free. That took out a whole lot of spells, so I had a much smaller pool to draw from. The second rule I had was I had to pick a spell from each spell level. So from cantrip to level 9th spells, I had to pick one from each, which again narrowed the pool down quite a bit, made it both easier and more difficult for me to pick the spells. And last, I didn't want to focus on just spells of one type. I didn't want to do just healing spells or just damage dealing. I had to choose a broad range of different spells to kind of cover all the bases, so to speak. So while this video may seem a little weird and disjointed, these are the spells that I think are best picks for clerics of every level, of every spell level. And I believe there's plenty enough room in a cleric's spell book, or a cleric's prepared spells, that high-level clerics could have all of these spells prepared at any time if they chose to do so. So for cantrips, we have the spell Guidance. Guidance is an instant aid for your party. You touch another character in your party and they are given a D4 to add to any ability check that they may do in the next 1 minute of in-game time. The downside of this is you have to be touched by the caster, but this spell is really great at low levels. At low levels, you're generally dealing with moderate ability scores. You don't have really high proficiency scores to help you out. You're just kind of you're a peon, basically. You're just getting started. But being able to add potentially a 4 onto any of your ability scores for your party is a big help. That's a 5 to 20% increase in chances of success based on that. That's pretty good. The downside of this is, yes, it's a cantrip and you can use it all the time, but you have to remember you have it available to you if you have it prepared. A good way to do this is in character, have your cleric explain to the adventure parties that they have an ability to help them, aid them in their ability checks by giving them guidance, and once the rest of the players know that, they'll probably remember to ask the cleric for some guidance here and there and say, hey, can you guide me on my lockpicking that I'm about to do? Can you guide me in my sneaking through this castle? Those kind of things can come into play, and it doesn't have to be just the players talking to each other and saying, hey, give me guidance, bro. But it can be the characters talking to the other characters, which I think is really fun. So, cantrip, Guidance. For the level 1 spell, I've picked Guiding Bolt, and this is essentially a low level but high damage spell that can be cast at a single target within 120 feet of you. You make a ranged attack roll at your target, and if you succeed, you cause 4d6 radiant damage to that creature. But even better is the next attack that hits that creature, until the end of your next turn, gets advantage on the attack roll. So it's not only a damaging thing, but it also is helping your party. The reason I picked this spell is because at lower levels, hitting anything for 4d6 dice is great. You're hitting with a minimum 4 damage, but a maximum of 24, which I think is fantastic. Especially since this is a level 1 spell at level 1, this is available to you right away. Sometimes, depending on your cleric domain, you might not really have room for this. Like, I've played a dedicated healer, so I don't keep this one prepared. I fill myself up with healing spells, or I did at the time, but I have a whole other video on why that's a little different now. And giving that advantage on the next attack is really good if you have some heavy hitters in your party that are just ready to wail on your enemies. So you can take on some bigger baddies at lower levels with this in your pocket. At level 2, I picked the spell Lesser Restoration, and this one's a pretty simple. You touch a creature and you're able to cure 1 disease, or blindness, deafness, paralysis, or poisoning. At low levels, those kind of situations, those status effects, I guess you could say, could be really bad in a combat situation. A level 2 character that gets paralyzed in the middle of a fight is more likely to die than a level 5 character who gets paralyzed in a fight. So being able to touch something and restore them back to full capacity, capabilities, is really good. Diseases oftentimes in the game come out in the form of a lowering of your maximum hit points, and that can also be pretty debilitating, especially for someone who's generally a high hit point character like a barbarian or something who could be cursed with a disease where suddenly instead of having 60 health, they're sitting at 30, which is some wizard stuff. Getting that disease out of them is a great way to help out the party. So this one is more of a utility spell, but I still really like it. At level 3, this was a tough decision, but I ended up picking Glyph of Warding. This is a trap, essentially. How this works is you draw your glyph on a surface or inside a container that you can close, and that glyph holds some sort of power, which we'll talk about in a moment. When a creature of some sort touches the glyph or opens the container, that glyph is triggered, just like a tripwire for a trap, and then the effect that glyph has takes hold, for example. The 2 main types of glyphs you have are explosive, which is a bomb. The explosion creates a 20-foot radius sphere of explosion from the point of the glyph that whoever triggered it has to take a dexterity saving throw, or they take 5d8 damage. The damage type can also be different depending on what you want to use. You can use acid, fire, cold, lightning, thunder, basically any of the elements you can use in your trap. The other type of glyph you can do, though, is the Spellglyph, and this is where I think this spell really shines. When you cast the glyph and you draw the glyph, you are able to cast a spell into it, and it is stored within the glyph until it is triggered. When the spell is triggered, the creature, whoever triggered the glyph, is the next target of that spell. Now, the spell can only be up to 3rd level, so you're not able to put really, really powerful spells into the glyph, but it is enough that you can pick some more utilitarian kind of spells, something that might bind somebody or hold them in place or just put them to sleep, something like that could come into play. You could put a larger, more damage-dealing spell in the glyph, something like that. You can even use spells that are generally concentration spells. If you remember, concentration spells in some situations, you have to maintain that spell with your mental capacity. So if you were to get hit or cast another spell, that spell would end. But if you do it with a glyph, if you cast a concentration spell into your Glyph of Warding, once that spell is triggered, that concentration spell remains for the full duration. It doesn't matter how long, if you take damage or anything, because it's kind of like being cast through the glyph. It's kind of a neat ability in that case. I think this comes into play a lot in certain situations. I personally think this could have come really handy in several situations in my games where we're in less than savory locations, less than savory people are trying to kill us, we don't trust them. Why not do a Glyph of Warding on the door, do something like that, blow them up? You get where I'm going with this. At level 4, I would pick Banishment. I would have this available to me all the time if I could. Banishment is a great way to send creatures who are not from the plane that you're on, just to send them home. So how does Banishment really work? First off, you target a creature within 60 feet of you and you cast the spell at them. They have to make a charisma saving throw, or else they are banished from the plane that they're currently in. Now, in Dungeons & Dragons, there are several different planes of existence. There is the material plane, which is kind of the real world. There's the astral plane. There's there's hell. There's elemental planes. There's a bunch of different planes of existence that creatures can come from. If the creature you target and banish is from a plane other than the one you're currently on, they will go home and stay there until the spell is done. If the 1 minute timer, this is a 1 minute concentration spell, it has to last for the 1 minute. If the spell can maintain that 1 minute concentration and that creature stays on their home plane for that time, then they are stuck there for a while. They can't just come back. But if that concentration is broken at any point in that 1 minute, then that creature immediately returns to where they were left. You can also cast this spell on creatures that are from the same plane of existence that you are currently in. So if you're in the material plane and you cast it on someone who also belongs in the material plane, they will go to kind of a separate pocket dimension for a little while. Harmless, they won't take any damage, but they disappear to this pocket dimension for a minute. The same rules apply. If the concentration is broken, they will reappear. But the difference is at the end of the 1 minute, they will just reappear anyways. There is no sending them away permanently if they're from the same plane as your current location. I like this spell a lot because I've seen it used in games. It's pretty fun. But the idea of being able to take a much more powerful enemy than you and just send them away, just be like, get out of here, is a great way to avoid combat if you're in a situation where suddenly you might be hurting, your party might have been through a couple fights and they can't really do another one. If you're running low on spell slots, you can save this 4th level spell slot to banish something. And even if the creature that you are facing is from the same plane as you, you can at least buy yourself a minute of time by sending them away. I think that's really useful. The downside is this is a charisma saving throw, so some creatures have a very good chance of passing that and not being whooped away. So keep that in mind. But I really think banishment just belongs in the Cleric's toolkit. At level 5, I'm going to suggest the spell called Dawn. Dawn is just a big, dang cylinder of bright light that just hurts things. When you cast Dawn, it summons down a 30-foot radius by 40-foot tall cylinder of bright light. That is daylight. It's the sun. You just called the sun to your location. Any creature that is inside that cylinder or ends their turn inside that cylinder has to make a Constitution saving throw, or they take 4d10 radiant damage. If they succeed that saving throw, they still take half the damage. Also, you can move this hulking massive cylinder of light around. As long as you're within 60 feet of it, you can move it 60 feet on your turn as a bonus action. I picked this one because these large AoE spells, they're just a lot of fun. At this level 5 spellcasting, it comes in handy. They will come in really handy when you're dealing with large groups of enemies, like lower level enemies might come in larger groups. Hit them with this area of effect kind of spell. I think that's great. And that's mainly it. That's why I like this one. A lot of the spells, I think, at level 5 were already picked up by cleric classes. The Cleric Divine Domain, so I didn't pick any of those. But this one just stood out and is like, yeah, let's get some Dawn on these guys. At level 6, I picked the spell Harm. Harm is an interesting spell that I've never actually seen used in a game, but I think is cool, and I want to see someone use it. So use it. Harm is a spell that you can cast on a creature, and they have to make a Constitution saving throw. If they fail, they take 14 d6 necrotic damage. 14. If they succeed their save, they still take half of that damage. So the damage range you're looking at is 14 to 84. The thing that makes this spell interesting is that it can't actually kill the creature. It can take them down to 1 hit point, is as far as it can take them close to killing them. It can't drop them down to 0. But after the spell is cast, if they failed the Constitution saving throw, that creature's maximum hit points is now reduced by the amount of damage they took for the next hour. So think about this. If you're fighting a creature that has, say, 50 hit points, and you cast the spell, and you hit them for 50 hit points, necrotic damage, and they fail their save, it will take them down to 1 health because they can only take so much damage. They can only get down to 1. But their maximum hit points are now reduced by that amount, by 50, or in this case it would be 49 because you can't take them down to 0. So then their max hit points for the next hour is only 1. So even if they're healed, they still would only have 1 health. That's a bit absurd. I think that's fun. And I think it would be a great thing to throw at a big guy at this level and just be like, yeah, I just took away 80 of your health, and then have another of your party member just whack them a couple times and then they're dead. You don't always have to have the killing blow as a cleric, but this is a good way to help out. For level 7 spells, I picked the spell Resurrection. This one is a really powerful resurrection spell. You're able to bring to life a creature that has been dead for less than 100 years. 100 years is a long time. You can bring that creature back to life, and they have a couple penalties on their ability at the moment. You bring back a creature who has been dead for less than 100 years, and this spell also removes any mortal wounds or any diseases they may have had. The downside of this is it is a taxing experience. If you've ever come back from the dead, you'll know. But you basically, then that creature now has a -4 penalty on all ability checks and saving throws and attacks. After they're alive again, as they take long rests, so every time they take a long rest, that penalty goes down by 1. So after one long rest, they'll have a -3 to all their ability checks, saving throws, and attacks. -2 after another long rest, a -1, and then back to just a regular person after about 5 days of long rests. The debilitating effect of this also does affect the caster. When you cast this spell, you cannot cast another spell for the rest of the day until you take a long rest. But also, any of your ability checks, saving throws, and attack rolls are done with disadvantage, because this is a lot of power. This is magic has a cost kind of dramatic moment going for you. The other problem with this spell is it costs a diamond worth 1,000 gold to cast, and it just burns that up, and that's 1,000 gold gone. Why did I pick this spell? Well, at this point in your game, if you've gone this long without a player or a character dying, you're doing something great, but you're likely going to have some character die soon, and this is the safest way to get them resurrected and back in the fight quickly at this level, I think. In some DMs like to put other characters, other NPCs that can bring characters back to life. I've done that. It's doable, but this is a good surefire way to do it. The penalties on coming back to life and casting this spell are kind of annoying, but they're not terrible. They're not the worst. You can take care of it in the game with a couple long rests. The cleric who casts this can just get one long rest and they're back in top-notch shape. The person who was resurrected takes a little longer, but it's still not bad. So that's why this is my level 7 pick. For my level 8 spell, I picked the spell Earthquake. This one's kind of interesting because it doesn't have direct damaging effects to creatures so much as it does to buildings. As you cast the spell Earthquake, you're creating actually a 100-foot radius circle of earthquake. So the ground starts shaking, everything's crazy. Anyone in that 100-foot radius circle has to make a dexterity save or they fall prone. And that continues on every turn that this earthquake is still happening. Earthquakes also have the chance to open fissures, big crevasses in the ground that characters can fall into. If they fall in, they're going to take some damage depending on how deep the fissure is. But also, the thing I like about it is you can damage buildings. Every round that this earthquake is active, you have the potential of damaging a building for 50 hit points, which some buildings have hit points because you can knock them down pretty easily, and then you can raid the castle. I like this spell because at level 8, there's not a lot of options for 8th level spells. For clerics, there's only 4 8th level spells available. And this one I think can come really handy in siege situations if you're facing a large, unbeatable enemy. By the time you get level 8, I believe you're level 14 or 15 in the game when you hit this tier of spellcasting. So it's very possible that you're going to be up against some big armies, essentially, with just your adventure party. So that's why I thought a really nice AoE that could be kind of a crowd control spell could come in really handy for a cleric. At 9th level spells, being the cream of the crop and the most powerful spells in the game, I picked the one Mass Heal. Clerics generally are the healers, and I thought this one fit perfectly, and it's a pretty straightforward thing to do. You have a range of 60 feet around you, and you can pick any number of creatures within 60 feet who will be affected by this mass healing. You then have a pool of 700 hit points that you can divvy up among all the creatures you've decided to heal. So rather than rolling dice and hoping for the best, you just naturally have a lot of health you can give people, and you can do it to a lot of people. In addition to that, you also cure any diseases that these characters or creatures might have. So this has the potential to heal up an adventure party almost completely from almost nothing, depending on the characters, of course. You have a lot of potential here to just pump out hit points. Just pump hit points into the atmosphere with Mass Heal. That's why I like this spell. That's why I think it fits great in a cleric's toolbox. Those have been my picks. There's 10 spells that I think are the best cleric spells in the book. I hope you agree. If you don't, let me know in the comments below. Of course, I've been Richard. Thanks for watching.